Hi everyone, this is Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm here with Karen Tate, and we're going to be talking about goddess spirituality. And Karen, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me, Carrie.
Well, I'm very happy to have you, and I'm going to read a short bio here, just very briefly go over some of this, and then I'm going to ask you to pick up the rest of the slack. And let me see if I can actually get all of this happening. So, hi everyone. So, at any rate, Karen is an independent scholar, speaker, radio show host, published author, and social justice activist. She has a body of work that blends her experiences of women-centered multiculturalism, evident in archaeology, anthropology, and mythology, and unique academic and literary talents, travel experience throughout the world. She's got a book called Sacred Places of Goddess, 108 Destinations, and it has garnered prestigious endorsements around the world. And let me see, she has a second book called Walking an Ancient Path, Rebirthing Goddess on Planet Earth, and was a finalist in the National Best Books of 2008 Awards. And her work has been highlighted in the Los Angeles Times, the Seattle Times, and other major newspapers. Her book, Goddess Calling, Inspirational Messages and Meditations of Sacred Feminine Liberation, and Theology is due out. And is that now out? Thinking perhaps.
Yes, actually, Goddess Call came out at the end of 2014, and Voices to the Sacred Feminine, an anthology that was based on my radio show, came out at the very end of 2014.
Okay, and actually, I'm just looking through here. Looks like you've been consulting on projects that bring ideals and awareness of the sacred feminine into the mainstream world through television and film. You can be seen in the new documentary, Femme, Women Healing the World, produced by Wonderland Entertainment. So that's actually most of your bio right there. But what I'd like you to do is augment that with your own experiences. Talk a little bit more about yourself, how you kind of started to follow this path.
Okay, sure. Well, no one's more surprised than me, quite frankly. I ended up on this path because where I started was in the total opposite direction. I was born in New Orleans, which is the Bible Belt of the southern portion of the United States, and it's very conservative. And you don't really hear about the goddess in the Bible Belt. But my husband and I moved to California in the early 90s. And it was like a tsuami, quite frankly. I discovered a feminine face of God, and one thing led to another, and I became ordained and started doing books, started a not-for-profit organization called the Isis Ancient Culture Society, and you know, it's like everything you do, one thing prepares you to do the next thing, and it wasn't long before I realized that mythology shapes our culture, and so that sort of brought in the added dimension of politics, the idea of losing a feminine face of God. You know how that has. You know, what effect has that had on women? You know, that's why they're subjugated. They're second-class citizens. Maybe they're only making 70 or 80 cents on the dollar. That we still have men who dare think it's their right to tell us if we can have contraception or abortion, and you know, the whole list of it. You know, female genital mutilation, domestic violence. You know, I could go on and on. So it's gone from being a spirituality where I, you know, learned about goddess to teaching about the sacred feminine, not just as deity, but also an archetype or role model. And even more important now, I think sometimes, is the ideals of the sacred feminine, because it is liberation theology. It does provide us a template for a new normal. And that's what I like to talk about a lot, and explain to people how that all fits together.
Okay, well, that's lovely. And in terms of the way you look at all of this, is this coming from a personal place where you, I don't, not to get into stereotypes, but were you, I don't know, abused, or did you have something happen, some crystallization event that then kind of propelled you on this road to want to deal with the oppression of women, etc.?
Well, to be honest, no. I grew up, like I said, in the South, and to be frank, I wasn't even aware of institutionalized sexism or women being second-class citizens. It really wasn't until I started studying, feminism, sociology, anthropology, herstory, that I started looking out beyond myself personally to see how mythology shapes our culture. And if we have a mythology that is, primarily based on a war god or a male god, then we end up with male leadership. And that's what we have today. We have patriarchy, rule of men, and that automatically relegates women to second-class status, and it shows itself in a lot of the different ways I've already described. And for me, I think it just became a matter of what's fair, what's just. Fortunately, I'm not a woman who's been violated. Unless you want to count, maybe in the workforce, not getting equal pay for equal work. But fortunately, I have a wonderful husband, so, it's not like this, there wasn't a catalyst for me to, to try to fix wounds, if you will. This wasn't a journey of healing for me. It was really just a matter of morality and ethics and social justice.
Okay, well, in terms of your consulting work for film and television, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing right now in that area?
Well, there's some irons in the fire, that I probably shouldn't go into, but FEM was one of the most recent things that's actually out there that people can see. And Emmanuelle Etier of Wonderland Entertainment and Sharon Stone, the actress, they were two of the primary producers of FEM, Women Healing the World. And it's something I'm very proud of being a part of, not just because of the message it carries, but so many of my personal mentors were actually in the film, so it was a thrill for me to be in the film alongside, women of this caliber. But it's a courageous film that I believe should be required viewing in schools, churches, book clubs. It should be something we're teaching our children, because it explains how things weren't always this way. It starts at the beginning, and has the courage to actually speak out about our culture was different 30,000 years ago. People did worship a feminine face of God. We know that because of the artifacts. We know that because of all the remnants we have of their material culture. And then things shifted. The Abrahamic religions come into the, come onto the scene, and we end up with really what some feminist scholars call the first piece of patriarchal propaganda, which was the Garden of Eden story. Because, we believe that before the Garden of Eden story, that's when goddess was revered, and, some of our societies were more of an egalitarian nature. But when patriarchy enters the picture and the Garden of Eden comes along, suddenly woman is birthed from, Adam's rib, and, it's because of woman, we have all of the suffering, and Adam and Eve were, cast out of the garden because, that wicked Eve, she wanted to taste that apple from the tree of knowledge. So it was just sort of downhill from there for women, and again, going back to that important premise that mythology shapes our culture, you can see with that one story how it has shaped, our culture, our religions, how we deal with one another as genders for thousands of years.
Sure. Well, actually, it does, if you want to follow the mythology a little bit there, it also indicates that women are more intelligent than men from the get-go, just having a little humor there. That's interesting. Just to sort of find out a little bit more about the film itself that you were involved in, and not to belabor it too long, but I'm curious, you're saying that it should be required viewing, and what is the storyline, or why do you think that Femme, I haven't seen it, I don't know if it's out in theaters or where it is, or if it's an older film, but can you tell us why you think it's required viewing?
Sure. I'll answer each of those questions. I think it should be required viewing because, first of all, it takes people to the past. It explains that there was a sacred feminine. Having grown up in the Bible Belt, as I explained at the beginning of our interview, I didn't even know about that, and I know there's so many people who that's never something they even find out about, and I think that's part of my mission. This history that's been swept beneath the rug. Not only that it's been kept from us and swept beneath the rug, but the ramifications of having swept it beneath the rug, if you know what I mean. So the film dares to talk about that because it's not a welcome notion in some quarters. Some people who are part of the Abrahamic religions, they don't think anything happened before the Bible, or some of their mythology, their stories. But I think so. It starts with goddess. It explains how patriarchal culture comes into being. But I think what's most important about it is it doesn't just talk about the problems. It offers solutions. It talks about how the genders can come together in partnership and in love. And, we don't have to continue to have this imbalance. And, it gets into a lot of different areas, of religion, economics. And I think it brings a new awareness to some people who maybe have never even thought about what shapes our culture, or that there was a herstory. People are amazed to find out that we have artifacts that date back 40,000 years that show humanity was worshiping a feminine face of God. So on so many different levels, I think it's very eye-opening, and these aren't the things they teach in school. So we have to sort of take responsibility for our own education, I believe, and this is one example of that. Viewing that,
Okay, now is that film a documentary?
Yes, it is a documentary, and
Okay.
it's won awards all around the globe at film, dozens and dozens of film festivals. And you can either stream it live or you can buy a DVD. There are many different ways to access it. One of them is just going to, you can Google Femme, Women Healing the World. And it'll take you to a link that'll give you options on how you can see it.
Okay. What about, let's see, what what about the occult? Have you looked into the occult aspects of this story and delved into it from the point of view of, say, a white witch or any other investigations along those lines?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I mean, I know people who are Wiccans are very much interested in goddess spirituality. Myself, I don't identify that way. I consider myself a goddess advocate. I'm more into this from, a feminist point of view rather than identify as a Wiccan. But of course, some people, who are Wiccans, they're earth-based spirituality, their deities or gods and goddesses, they're polytheistic. I hope that answers your question. I'm not really sure where you meant to go with that.
Sure. Well, just in terms of the areas of your investigations and what you're sort of delving into, because you've written a number of books now, do you want to talk about the different books and why you wrote them?
Sure. Well, the first book, I got the opportunity to write that, Sacred Places of Goddess, 108 Destinations. And, I think that came around in about 2005, I believe. The publisher for CCC Publishing discovered me, and he had a series of travel books out. And he found out that my husband and I had actually traveled probably across 5 continents, tracking down sacred sites of goddess. And, for me, I think probably the most important mentors for me were Riane Eisler, who wrote The Chalice and the Blade, and Merlin Stone, who wrote When God Was a Woman. And I really discovered that the idea of a feminine face of God wasn't just a feminist fantasy. And going to these sacred sites, I think, really validated all of that. When you go to the Louvre or you go to the British Museum or you stand in these sacred sites where the sacred feminine was worshipped at one time, or maybe still is, it has quite an impact, especially for us in the West, where we don't have these ancient archaeological sites, or we don't have these grand museum like the British Museum or the Louvre, that have so much history. Probably the best we have in the United States, are some of the museums in New York. But the opportunity for that book came along, and it gave me the opportunity to put out into the mainstream world through the lens of sacred travel the idea that goddess has been worshipped around the globe by so many different cultures and is still being worshipped around the globe.
Okay, so that's one of your books, I guess maybe the first one, and it sounds fascinating. I do a lot of traveling myself, and I was wondering if you are familiar with Carmen Balter. She is a professor in a Canadian university, and I accompanied her to Egypt, for example, and I've done an interview with her that might interest you, and she is always looking into the feminine side of the story in Egypt, for example. Have you gone to Egypt, and was that one of the places you reported on?
I've been to Egypt probably 3 different times, and 2 of my favorite places in Egypt are the island of Philae, where the Isis temple is, and a small, rather obscure little temple dedicated to the lion-headed Egyptian goddess Sekhmet. But there's also other wonderful places, like in Abydos or Bubastis, and Karnak, Luxor, Aswan, all along the Nile. In ancient Egypt, society was different than in other parts of the world. Women had more power. They could have their own assets. They could even divorce their husbands. But I think what's really interesting about the sacred travel is there's so many places that people aren't even aware that these sites are actually sacred to goddess as well. Like, for instance, the Temple Mount, is one of them. We think of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem as sacred to only the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians. But we forget that right there on the Temple Mount, there was a temple to Aphrodite, that there were temples to the Roman goddesses. Even in Mecca, that was a site where, the three goddesses, before Islam came along, Alat, Aluza, and the third goddess's name escapes me at the moment. But that was a site where a goddess was worshipped as a green meteorite that used to glow green, or over in Ireland, we have Saint Bridget as well as the goddess Bridget, worshipped simultaneously, really. So I just find it very interesting that there's so many places around the world that goddess sites are really sort of hidden in plain sight. Japan's another one. The sun goddess Amaterasu, right on their Japanese flag is the sun. So there's the symbol of Amaterasu right there on the national Japanese flag.
To say nothing of the Statue of Liberty, hey?
Yes, and I'm actually glad you reminded me of that. We consider the Statue of Liberty the political goddess.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and some would say ISIS.
ISIS a political goddess, or?
No, they would say that the Statue of Liberty is ISIS.
Well, I've heard that the Statue of Liberty, the position of the statue, with her arm raised, that it might have been copied from an ISIS statue. I don't know if that's actually true, but I've heard that story.
Have you looked into the Anunnaki stories, the investigations by Sitchin et al. And Inanna, and all of what Ninharsag, I think her name was, that had to do with creating their interaction with humanity. This is not the beginning of human history, contrary to what a lot of people think right now, at least in the alternative sector. But it is an important sort of juncture, and I wondered if you looked into that.
Well, I've looked at it from the standpoint of, maybe you could say, the overlap. That part of the world that you're talking about is the domain of Inanna and Ishtar, and I don't discount the Sitchin theories. I'm very open-minded. I think we simply don't know, and I find a lot of that information very provocative. I mean, I have people come up to me and say, well, do you think Isis, for instance, do you think she ever actually walked the earth, or if she's from, the Pleiades or from the stars? And, how can we really possibly know, But as I say, I keep an open mind about it because I don't think we can possibly know.
Okay, when you look at the history of sort of the masculine history and the feminine side, are you looking, for example, at Stonehenge and the Druids?
Well, that's just one people who were, connected to nature. The Celts. Of course, they had their gods and they had their goddesses, but they were just one of many groups of people, all around the world who were polytheistic and had, worshipped gods and goddesses. Some people say that the city of Paris is named for Isis worshippers, the Parisi, P-A-R-I-S-I. Has the name Isis there in it. Obviously, India, they've never forgotten the goddess for thousands of years. I mentioned Amaterasu in Japan. The Shinto still worship Amaterasu. You have, Kuan Yin in the East, where people are primarily Buddhist. Also in the East, wherever you have countries that grow rice, they go by many different names, but you have all the rice goddesses, because goddess, oftentimes is about sustenance and fertility. And, they still worship the rice goddesses in the East. And you can move all the way across Europe, and, you got the Nordic goddesses, the Egyptian goddesses, the goddesses of Malta, the Roman goddesses, the Hebrew goddesses, then, you have all the goddesses of South America, the Hawaiian goddesses, you have the Inuit goddesses up in like Newfoundland and Alaska. I mean, it's really, you have women's business in Australia. I mean, there's so much that connects people to feminine deity or feminine archetype or feminine ideals around the globe, but it's unfortunate in our patriarchal culture. We only end up, I think, unless we go looking for this, I think we only end up seeing maybe the patriarchal myths where goddesses are just a shadow of their former selves. I mean, take Hera, for instance. What do we generally learn in school about Hera? She's this petulant wife chasing after her philandering husband. Or, Aphrodite, she's the boudoir babe, these goddesses are just, they're spouseified or domesticated, and or Mary, for instance. You take Mary. Patriarchy allows us to have Mary because she's so docile and benign. She's wonderful, and she's the intermediary between us and God. But I'm not sure patriarchy would be so comfortable if suddenly we were able to rebirth into the world, the Kalis and the Durgas and the Sekhmets and the Morrigans, the archetypes that really inspire women to find their strength and their tenacity.
Absolutely, and women warriors as well. So throughout histories. Okay, so I'm wondering if you can talk about your other two books a bit, why you wrote those books and what path you were going down in that regard.
Yeah, as I look back in hindsight, the books really sort of follow my own evolution as a priestess and as a woman. And so after the Sacred Places book, it wasn't long after that I actually started a not-for-profit organization and was, doing personal development salons and rituals and Isis birthday salons and, teas and things like that in the Los Angeles area for about 10 years. So Walking an Ancient Path, which is the one that won the award that you mentioned, it's a book that I'd say is great for someone who's just beginning to think about incorporating this either into their personal life or into their community. Because what I did with it was I divided it into 5 sections. Earth, air, water, fire, and spirit. And the spirit section is really a little bit that's autobiographical in a sense. It tells how, a woman from the Bible Belt could end up a priestess of a goddess, in doing, and doing the goddess's work in the world. And the Earth section talks about all the different sacred pilgrimages we took, maybe 7 or 8, and it talks about it from the esoteric perspective. Maybe some of the magical experiences that we encountered along the way, or maybe the divine connections that we made in these sacred places. The fire section talks about the goddess Sekhmet, who in this time, the lion-headed Egyptian goddess, she's really becoming an archetype for women's empowerment, for women to set healthy boundaries, to say no without guilt, to learn strength and discernment and courage. So we talk about, her because she's a sun goddess, she's in the fire section, but also, the ideas of personal transformation. And we get into the air section, and it's about how goddess inspires us. And, it's also, too, about making a connection with goddess. And in the water section, that's about doing ritual and how ritual affects our lives and our psyches, and, how it helps us transform and grow. So, so that's a great book if, someone is wants to refresh themselves or start from scratch, to learn to incorporate, the sacred feminine in their life. From it, it's got prayers and meditations and personal stories. Talks about prophecy and divination, and then, a few years later, I wasn't doing the not-for-profit anymore, and because I was being called to, to teach and give talks, and, I would appear here, there, everywhere, and, talking about the different subjects about the sacred feminine. And I actually started Sunday services called Sacred Sundays, and they were sort of modeled off of Unitarian Universalist services, where the minister would, maybe give a message, every Sunday. And part of Goddess Calling incorporates some of those messages that I would give as a guest speaker. And part of the book, too, it is meditations that help us tap into our personal transformation, healing, growth, coming into balance, loving ourselves, sort of in a way self-help and healing, and using the meditations also for growth. But it's in this book that I really start to connect ideals of the sacred feminine with social justice, with how do we, how the sacred feminine can help us create a new normal and change the world. Those are the kinds of talks that I would give at Sacred Sundays. And finally, the fourth book is an anthology, and it's based on interviews that I've done on my own radio show, Voices of the Sacred Feminine. And I, handpicked some of my, I thought some of my best and most prestigious guests, like Noam Chomsky, for instance, Rianne Eisler, Father Roy Bourgeois, who was excommunicated from the Vatican because he wanted to stand by women because he believed they should be able to be ordained. People like that. We either have transcripts or essays from them that's a reflection of the interview that I did with them on my radio show, which has been going on for about 10 years.
Okay, well, thank you for that overview of your books. I think that people that are listening to this would find that valuable and maybe decide what works for them to investigate further. When you say that you had a message, and I'm assuming you have a radio show now, is that correct?
Yes, it's a radio show still runs every week.
Okay, so in terms of your messages that you put into your book, can you talk a little bit about the kind of messages that you would give out? And I'm also assuming, and you can, elaborate on this, but, the men listening, obviously we are androgynous beings. We have a male and a female side. So do you get into that, and can you acknowledge that the men would also find these books valuable?
Oh, most definitely. Because I think that's one of the misconceptions about all of this, that it's really just for women. And it really isn't. When the Dalai Lama said he thought it would be Western women that would save the world, I actually kind of think he's not right about Western women. I think it's sacred feminine liberation theology. And that's something that both men and women, I think, are in sync with. Because let's face it, there are women out there who don't embrace ideals that would do anything about the domination and exploitation and predator capitalism and all of that. You know, they're served by the status quo, so they're fine with things exactly as they are. So it's not what's in our genitals. You know, it's not what we're packing in our pajamas. It's what's in our heart. It's, you know, it's what's in our mind. And so, yeah, this is all equally, I think, important for women and men, because just as, you know, we have to come into wholeness is the bottom line. I mean, I hope one day we get to the point where we no longer have to talk about, you know, is it a male thing or is it a female thing, you know, and it's just an us thing, you know, it's a we thing. But, you know, we're not quite there yet as a species, and I think we have to recognize that some of the ideas that we label feminine have been downplayed or considered weak in our patriarchal culture. And we have to, I think, dust those off and bring them back out, you know, like caring, sharing, negotiation, partnership. You know, those are things that we consider feminine ideals. And wouldn't our world be a better place if we had more of those ideals at the center of society rather than the domination, the exploitation, the predator capitalism, the greed, you know? So, so yes, I think, you know, women have to find more of the traits that we might label masculine to bring themselves into wholeness, and men have to find and embrace some of the traits that we might label feminine to incorporate into themselves so that they too would be whole. In fact, it's interesting, my husband and I were taking some Kabbalah classes not that long ago, and one of the teachings that I just loved was they actually told